Right before Tuesday's deadline to protect prospects from the Rule 5 draft, the Cardinals added 4 to their 40-man roster. We'll tell you who, as well as talk about the surprise awards vote that came in for one Cardinal this week. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. Couple of good Cardinals topics lined up to talk about today, as the Cardinals did add 4 prospects to the 40-man roster on Tuesday. Had to do it before that deadline on Tuesday afternoon to protect certain guys from the Rule 5 draft. That's coming up in December at the end of the winter meetings, and we talk about this every year around this time. A quick refresher on the way it works. If a player has had 5 years of professional service time, not major league service time, but if they've been in the organization as part of 5 seasons, then you have to protect those players from the Rule 5 draft by adding them to the 40-man roster ahead of what was yesterday's deadline. If you don't, and a player has had those 5 years of professional service, then they could be selected by another team in the Rule 5 draft. And if they are, players got to stay on that roster the whole season, the big league roster. And if they do, then that player is now permanently a part of the new organization. So somebody like Tink Hence, that's probably the main name we'll talk about today, who was drafted by the Cardinals in 2020, so that was his first year, 2021, 2022, 2023, and now this was 2024, his 5th year with the team. They count that first year, even though that was the year he was drafted. That 2020 season is part of that mix. Then Tink Hence now has to be protected by the Cardinals and added to the 40-man roster. That was a no-brainer decision for the Cardinals to do that because he's one of their top prospects. Still only 22 years old, so he's making his way. He probably figures to be part of that AAA Memphis rotation perhaps as early as the beginning of this 2025 season. So it was not even a thought that the Cardinals wouldn't protect Tink Hence because he would be very drafted in the Rule 5 draft. And people might say, well, he's not Major League ready. Sure, but think about teams that aren't really expecting to be too competitive, which, hey, this could apply to the Cardinals, right? They could end up scooping up some players in the Rule 5 draft from other teams based on the state of their roster, the fact that they're not really going out and signing a bunch of free agents to fill the holes. It could be that the Rule 5 draft is a way for them to fill some holes. Remember, Ryan Fernandez was an example of this last year. The Cardinals drafted Ryan Fernandez in the Rule 5, kept him on the team the whole year. He ended up being a really key part of their bullpen, and that was in a season where the Cardinals were trying to be competitive. So certainly they could be players in this process coming up in a few weeks down in Arlington as the Rule 5 takes place at the winter meetings. But the Cardinals are looking then internally now with a number of 40-man roster spots that had become available because of the fact that the Cardinals were letting guys go like Lance Lynn, Kyle Gibson, Paul Goldschmidt. There was some room to play with. And look, there could be more attrition from the 40-man throughout the offseason if the Cardinals are looking to make some additional moves. Remember, they brought in Roddery Munoz. He's part of that 40-man roster now. I think as of now, after Tuesday's moves, the roster's at 39. We'll talk about the other names that were added and one that was dropped off in a roster move on Tuesday. And I also want to talk a little bit about the awards vote because it is awards season. We had the Rookie of the Year announcement earlier this week. Mason Wynn did not get any votes in the top 3 of the NL rookies. The order on that one went Paul Skeens as the winner. And then I believe number 2 was Jackson Merrill, the outfielder for San Diego. And then I think third place was Jackson Chourio, the outfielder for the Brewers. So it was pretty unanimous for the most part. I think 23 of the first place votes went to Paul Skeens, and then the other 7 went to Merrill and vice versa. Those who had Skeens second on their ballot that didn't have him first, he was second, and then Merrill had all the other second place votes with Chourio coming in third. So not too surprising there. Mason Wynn had a really good season. Those guys just had better rookie seasons. It was a great year for rookies in the National League, and I think that group of players that just had their rookie seasons this past year, you're going to see continue to be fixtures and focal points of the league moving forward. Imanaga for the Cubs, I think, picked up a stray vote, but mostly it was those 3 guys at the top. However, Manager of the Year was announced on Tuesday, and while we knew the finalists going in, you didn't necessarily know all of the names of all of the managers that got votes. And there was a stray vote cast for Cardinals manager Oli Marmol. So I'm going to talk about that after we get into and dive into the 40-man roster stuff, because I'm sure that my following here on YouTube is going to have a reaction. Already I saw somebody on Twitter say, oh, I didn't realize that Brenden Schaeffer had a vote in the Manager of the Year. Ha ha, very funny. I actually am eligible to vote for these awards, believe it or not. as part of BWAA, Baseball Writers Association of America member. I voted in Rookie of the Year last year. Our St. Louis chapter, though, has so many participatory members that I don't get a vote every year. Last year was the first time, and it may be a couple more years before I get cycled back in. Always enjoy the chance to do that when I get it. But no, I did not have a vote for Manager of the Year. I did not vote Oli Marmol for Manager of the Year because I didn't have a vote. Contrary to what people who have their opinion on how they think I view Oli Marmol, which I do. I think Oli's a good manager. But the YouTube chat, I'm sure, will have thoughts about that. So get your jokes in, get your thoughts in, and we'll talk about it a little bit at the end. But before we get into the Tink Hence talk and diving into the 40-man, I want to say that I'm proud to be partnering with Underdog Fantasy, my favorite place to be playing fantasy games. You got to check out their Pick'em. It's easy to play. Pick 2 to 8 stats of your favorite players, choosing whether they'll go higher or lower on those stats. And if it sounds like fun, you can sign up with the promo code b-schaeff. It's right there on your screen to claim your free pick and first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. That's promo code b-schaeff for Underdog Fantasy. Great time to be doing it with NBA in full swing, NFL, NHL. They've got all kinds of fun games and contests on Underdog Fantasy, and they are a proud partner of b-schaeff Daily and the YouTube channel here, so appreciate you guys. And with winter meetings coming up, I've already maybe lined up one deal to have a partner help facilitate some winter meetings coverage. If you would like to get your business or whatever it is that you would like for me to promote and partner with b-schaeff Daily involved in that, try to get me to Arlington here, I would appreciate you hitting me up via DM at bschaeffer12 is where you can do that. Literally anything you want to talk about. I'm pretty easy to deal with when it comes to these ideas. So if you have an idea for me, throw it my direction, and we might just be able to set something up. All right, let's talk some Cardinals here with the news from Tuesday, the main news from Tuesday. Cardinals added 4 players to the 40-man roster. Those players were Tink Hence, Takoda Roby, Matt Svanson, and Matt Koperniak, 3 pitchers and an outfielder added to the 40-man roster. Those guys all would have been eligible for selection in the Rule 5 draft, and now they're on the 40-man, so they'll stick with the Cardinals. At least heading into spring training, they'll be part of the organization. There's no guarantee for any of these guys to be in the big leagues this coming summer. That's not necessarily what this means, but it is the mechanism through which the Cardinals had to protect them from other teams being able to poach them off the St. Louis roster come December. Tink Hence was an obvious one. Let's talk about his season last year and what we might see potentially for him this coming year. This could be the debut season for Tink Hence. The biggest question I still have about him and what his future is going to look like is not whether he'll make the big leagues, but when, but even more than that, how. Like, what's the role going to be for Tink Hence? He's been a starter all the way through, and the Cardinals would love for him to stay one. He had a 2.71 ERA this last summer in 20 starts, but he only threw 79 innings, 79 and 2/3 innings with Double-A Springfield. The numbers were good. The ERA was good. The strikeout rate shows how good the kid is and how good the stuff is. 109 strikeouts in 79 and 2/3 innings. The problem was some health issues. It was a little bit vague throughout the season as to what exactly Tink was dealing with. Started out talking about it as if it was cramps, and obviously with the amount of time missed, you kind of figure it was maybe a little bit more than that. I remember talking with him down in Birmingham back in June when he was going through some of this and said he was really getting close to being able to get back out on the mound. And then shortly thereafter he did, but it was a short stint, and I think was dealing with some more physical issues to where he was out for even longer after that, and ultimately only able to accrue 79 and 2/3 innings during a summer where the idea was to get him well up and over 100 innings. He was at 96 in 2023 and then didn't get to 80 this past year. So in terms of his future, you want to get him up to a workload that shows he can handle 25, 30 starts in the big leagues, and you figure 5-6 innings per start. You want to get this guy to where he can throw 150 innings as the proof of concept before I think the Cardinals are going to consider him for a rotation spot. Now, granted, they could put him into a spot as early as 2025 if he's performing well. I don't think that's outside the question, but it is a question of, do you have to shut him down at some point? Do you have to monitor the workload? I think that's going to be a thing. And not just from a perspective of like playing with the workload, but physically, is he able to take the ball 30 times? Can he have that summer? Still very young. So it's not like we're getting to a point of no return on this with Tink Hence, where you say, if he can't do it this year, he's a reliever for life. I don't view it that way, and I don't know that the Cardinals are. They've been very patient with Tink Hence, so I don't think they're suddenly going to about-face during a year that really organizationally is supposed to be about development and turn around and say, it's put up or shut up time. But it would be really great if we could map out the year for Tink Hence. It could be 120 innings where he, starts 20 times at Memphis and maybe gets his feet wet with a couple of starts late in the season. If he's performing in Memphis with like a 3 ERA or something where his performance dictates he should be up, he could be a guy that plugs in later in the season. But it is a question of, like, you're not necessarily penciling him into 2026 to say he's going to throw you 180 innings, because that ramp up is one that we just haven't seen take place yet for him. But the talent is out of this world. He's still one of the Cardinals. At worst, he's their number 3 prospect behind J.J. Weatherholt and Quinn Matthews. That's the absolute floor for where I would put him in the prospect rankings right now, because the talent is still out of this world. It's the same talent that the Cardinals have been nurturing since they drafted him in 2020 in the second round. And he's still a very exciting part of the Cardinals' future. Was a no-brainer to add to the roster. It's just going to be interesting to see what does spring look like for Tink Hence. What does the early portion of the season look like? Do they jump him to AAA right away? Is there room to do that based on the other guys that are maybe blocking up there in that rotation? Because you've got to decide some things about guys like Kloffenstein and Sam Robertson and Liberatore and Zach Thompson. Like, what are the roles going to be for all those guys, and how many spots are there at AAA? Because I do think Quinn Matthews, who got to AAA at the end of last year, is a no-brainer to start as their ace of that Memphis rotation. Where does Tink Hence slot in? I think it's definitely in Memphis this year, even if not quite at the very beginning of the season. But it would make sense for them to bump him to Memphis if they can, and then it's going to be about performance and workload from there. But this could be the debut year for Tink Hence. I'm not counting that out by any stretch, and so we'll see where that goes. Let's talk the next guy on the list, Takoda Roby, who came into 2024 as a consensus top 100 prospect. If you're looking at Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, MLB Pipeline, like, he was toward the tail end of those top 100 lists on all of those publications, and it just was not the year Takoda Roby was looking for because of injury, right? It's hard to really dictate or diagnose how he performed. The ERA was 6.5 between A-ball and AA, but he just didn't get to pitch very much. 38 innings is all he logged. He's a guy that was dealing with injury going back to when the Cardinals first acquired him, and it's an interesting spot for Takoda Roby to be in. No-brainer to protect, because if you're somebody that has followed the pedigree of the prospect, and you're another organization and he's available in the Rule 5 draft, you're like, I don't know if he's healthy, but let's pick him up and let's throw him in our Major League bullpen just to see. And maybe down the road, as he stretches out and he gets a little healthier and proves it, he can turn into a starter for us, but we can stash him in the bullpen for a year as just a middle relief, or a guy that could, as we talked about on the last episode of the podcast, that 2028 Baseball America list had him listed as the closer in 2028. So is there a thought that this guy could turn into a future back-end reliever with the stuff that he has? I think yes, but it's just a case of, is he, what's the health going to be long term? Is he going to have a fully healthy 2025? If he does, I think you'll see Takoda Roby traverse through the system quickly, and I honestly think you could see him in the big leagues if they decide to go that route in terms of relief role. So we'll just have to see, but it's all going to be about health. He just turned 23 years old, September 18, 01. He was born a week after 9/11. That's, I don't know how old my audience is, but I mean, a lot of us were certainly remember 9/11. Now you got guys who were born right around that time, and they're on the cusp of MLB debuts. That's just the nature of getting older. But anyway, that's kind of not relevant to anything, but just kind of what popped into my mind seeing Takoda Roby's birthday. But he's a guy that I think the Cardinals are still very high on. Can he have a healthy season? Even to more of an extent than we talked about with Tink Hence, I think that's going to be the case with Takoda Roby. Matt Svanson, we'll talk about the last pitcher that was added to the 40-man yesterday, and he's an interesting case. When the Cardinals got him, it was for Paul DeJong from the Blue Jays back in July 2023, or it might have been that August 1st deadline 2023, where they were just ready to find a new home for DeJong that summer, and Svanson was a guy that had not even pitched, I don't believe, at AA at that point in his career, and was old to be still at A-ball. But the Cardinals traded for him, was a reliever at 23 years old in high A, immediately sent him to AA Springfield at the time. He performed pretty well the rest of that season, and Cardinals started him at Springfield this past summer, and he ended up staying there the whole season and was their closer, essentially. Had 27 saves and a 2.69 ERA. Now, he was 25 years old, turned 25, and is going to be 26 before spring training. So when you think about prospects, you're like, all right, that's not really prospect age anymore, but has been performing at the levels that he's played at, and I feel like it would make a lot of sense for him to bump up to AAA this next season, and that brings you right to the cusp. If you're a closer caliber arm pitching in AAA, Matt Svanson could be a guy who debuts for the Cardinals in 2025, especially considering if they end up trading away some relievers, like guys like Ryan Helsley, maybe a guy like JoJo could be on the block. Just considering the factor of where the Cardinals are at and not necessarily prioritizing winning now. Romero's a player that they definitely like, but could you fetch a good prospect for him from a team that's looking for a wipeout lefty? It could line up rather than pay him a few $1,000,000 for the Cardinals to consider floating him. Andrew Kittredge is a guy that we have not really talked about in terms of the offseason moves and guys that are departing, but he's a free agent. So that's another spot in your bullpen that you would potentially be looking for a guy maybe like Svanson to fill. I mean, I think he could come into spring and have an opportunity, but there's a lot of guys from that 40-man roster that you still have. Riley O'Brien, Ryan Ludus, Kyle Leahy, a bunch of different right-handers that are going to be looking for opportunity, and we'll see what the Cardinals end up doing there. But yeah, Svanson's a guy who don't write him off, and the Cardinals certainly haven't, because I think based on where he's tracked to this point, it would have made a lot of sense for, if he was available in Rule 5, any team could have come up and said, all right, we'll throw him in our bullpen this year, even though he's only pitched at AA, and we'll just see what it looks like. And if we get lucky with a diamond in the rough, kind of like the Cardinals did with Ryan Fernandez, then you shoot, you score, and you feel good about that. So the Cardinals didn't want that to happen, but anytime you bring a reliever and put him on the 40-man, that tells you he's an option for this next year to be getting a call-up at some point if the performance looks good. He's listed at 6'5", 235, too, so another big guy. Chris Roycroft, I failed to mention him, but he's still on that 40-man, 6'8", 230. So we'll see what it looks like for Svanson. We'll get a good look at him in spring, I reckon. That'll be kind of the next chance for us to really get and form more of an opinion on how he could help the Cardinals out in the future. And then the one position player that was added to the 40-man roster on Tuesday was Matt Koperniak, outfielder from Memphis. Another guy who's at that age where it's like, all right, not really prospect age anymore. He's 26, actually going on 27. He'll turn 27 right before spring training. Another one of those left-handed hitting outfielders. Cardinals have had a lot of those, obviously, but his performance in Memphis last year dictated that the Cardinals want to at least see a little bit more what they have in him. He could easily turn into somebody that's a future, big leaguer, that whether he's a starter or a fourth outfield type that can provide some pop off the bench. He hit 20 home runs last year in Memphis and hit for a 309 average. So he basically has done everything to this point that you'd want to see in somebody that could have a big league future. It's just he's kind of in that Luke and Baker territory, right, where he hasn't gotten a chance yet, and the Cardinals need to kind of make up their mind with, are they giving this kid an opportunity, or is it going to be more fair to give him an opportunity with another team? But I think the Cardinals are going to give him a good long look at spring, and in a year where they kind of bottomed out last year with their end of outfield options because of all the injuries. Koperniak could be kind of in that mix this year to certainly get a call up as organizational depth. The problem is they have so many left-handed bats. You'd like to see, like, if they had a right-handed version of Matt Koperniak, a guy with an 882 OPS in Memphis last year, that guy would have been on the team. I mean, it's just they've got so many darn lefties. That's one aspect of the roster that I do think, even if you're not trying your darndest to win this coming season, John Mozeliak and company should try to balance that out one way or another and see if they can get some right-handed bats for that mix so that Oli Marmol can have a little bit more to work with. But Koperniak is a nice piece that the Cardinals, again, just weren't ready to cast off into the ether before really getting a chance to let him show what he can do. So maybe that'll come, and he's a guy you'll see a ton. I think he'll play a ton in spring training, just because you get into that area where he's not one of your main starters, and he's somebody that is on that chopping block where, like, all right, long-term, is he a fixture? Is he a part of our organizational depth? What do we want to do with this player? You want to get a good long look at him. So he'll be coming into a lot of games, I reckon, Grapefruit League play in spring. Matt Koperniak added to the roster. It stands now at 39 because they did outright one off the 40-man, and that was Drew Rom, who was a left-handed pitcher, started some games down the stretch for the Cardinals in 2023 after he was traded in the, I believe he came over in the Flaherty deal from Baltimore, and just wasn't healthy this past year. So Cardinals passed him through waivers. Drew Rom still with the organization. He'll be down there in spring, I imagine, with a non-roster invite to spring training, but they outrighted him to Memphis because he cleared waivers. So that creates one more spot on the 40-man. There will be more maneuvering that happens, I assume, over the weeks ahead, but that is where it's at right now for the Cardinals at 39. They had Tink Hence. That was a no-brainer, and I think it made sense to add the other names that they did too, Takoda Roby, Matt Svanson, and Matt Koperniak, rounding out the Cardinals roster additions. As to whether there are players that the Cardinals did not protect, I think the big one that I want to point out is a name that I remember talking about last year on the podcast because he was Rule 5 eligible last season, another guy from that 2020 draft class. But part of the Rule 5 rule is that if you're signed at 19 years old or older, it's only 4 years rather than 5. And that made Ian Bedell eligible last year for the Rule 5. Cardinals did not protect him last year, and he did not get selected. So you kind of feel like you might be safe. But he's an interesting case because he's a guy who dealt with injury after the Cardinals drafted him out of Mizzou, M-I-Z, back in the 4th round of that 2020 draft. Remember, there were only 5 rounds, so he was, 1 out of 6 or so that they picked that year because I think they had multiple seconds. That's how they got Mason Wynn and Tink Hence. But Ian Bedell got healthy, and in 2023 finally got a decent number of innings under his belt, 96 innings that he threw at high A and lit it up because he was a 23-year-old pitching at high A with a lot of collegiate experience under his belt, had a 2.44 ERA. This past summer, they bumped him up to try to get him some more high-level experience. He had a 4.73 ERA in Springfield, and then they moved him to Memphis. He had a 5.02 ERA. But, that's on the cusp, and I'm not talking about Ian Bedell as though he lit it up last year. But if he's a guy that just, makes a couple of adjustments, he could be conceivably someone that you plug into a big league rotation, and maybe he gives you a 4.5 or a 5 ERA. And I'm not talking about that like it's, World Series caliber, but it is interesting that the Cardinals don't protect him when they have all of the potential moving parts coming around that, what do you do with a Sonny Gray? You're probably keeping him, but do you trade a Fetty? Do you dump a Michaelis? Do you dump a Matz? I'm not saying it's instructive that the Cardinals didn't protect Ian Bedell, and that can mean that they're looking to potentially keep all of those veterans. I don't know that you could make that connection, but it does feel like it's trending more toward it's going to be tough for the Cardinals to trade away some of the veterans or be willing to dump some of the veterans that we maybe previously thought they would. They obviously have other starting depth besides Ian Bedell, but he was a guy, and he's a Mizzou guy, so I'm a little biased. I want to see him stick with the Cardinals and see if he can get a chance down the road. But if not, he'll probably be back in that AAA rotation. But if we keep saying that about Quinn Matthews and Tink Hence and Bedell, and we don't know about Thompson, and we got, you eventually go, okay, maybe how many spots are in that rotation in AAA, just to kind of see how the Cardinals want to parse that out. But if Bedell doesn't get selected, which he didn't last year, so you hope he doesn't this year, then he'll pass through and probably be right back there in Memphis with the Cardinals. But just a name to keep in mind as that Rule 5 comes about. If there's an MLB team that truly just is punting on the season, sometimes that can be a blessing in disguise where you go, all right, we're going to throw our pick toward Ian Bedell and just put him in the rotation and see. He had a 4.85 ERA last year in 21 games, 107 innings. Can he throw us 120, 130 innings of 5 ERA at the big leagues? Okay, that's, not quite replacement level, but it's a free player. So there might be teams that take the Cardinals up on that and say, you didn't protect him, so we'll take him. Otherwise, nobody's really jumping out at me, but if I think of anything, I'll let you know as time goes along, if there's anybody new that starts to get talked about as potentially, and let me know in the comments too. A lot of y'all follow this stuff pretty closely, so if there's a name that you go, what about this guy? Could he be taking Rule 5? I'll try to get that info and that answer to you. All right, let's wrap things up by talking about the award vote cast by Keith Law for Oli Marmol, NL Manager of the Year. What do we think about this one? The ballots for BBWAA awards, which the awards that you hear about every year, Rookie of the Year, Manager of the Year, MVP, Cy Young, those are our awards. I say our awards because I am a member of the BBWAA. I voted on the Rookie of the Year last year. My vote counted for the award. It wasn't as though I had much of a real choice because it was pretty obvious that Corbin Carroll last year was the Rookie of the Year. A little bit more interesting on who you went second and third. I think I had Kodai Senga number 2, the Mets pitcher, but this year didn't have a vote. But these ballots are always fully transparent and available on the BBWA website. So when you wonder, well, who the heck did this vote? Why did they do that? It's always transparent. You can always go and find out, so you don't have to wonder who voted for whom. But Oli Marmol did receive a third-place vote for NL Manager of the Year from Keith Law. And I have not seen as to whether Keith Law has explained his voting. His voting was a little bit different than what a lot of others voted, which is fine. Everybody, has their prerogative and their ability to vote. It looks like Keith Law is protected on Twitter, and I don't currently follow him, so I couldn't tell you what he's potentially said about the vote, but he did. He voted for Oli Marmol, and it's kind of interesting. The reaction to it is interesting. Pat Murphy was NL Manager of the Year. Mike Schilt was number 2. That was pretty well consensus. Mendoza was 3rd. Torey Lovullo, Rob Thompson for the Phillies, and on the way down, Brian Snitker and Dave Roberts also got some stray third-place votes, and then Oli got 1 from Keith Law. What do we think about this? If you look at what the Cardinals were in 2023, bad team, 71 and 91, and the improvements they made, you can make a case that Oli Marmol did a much better job. And I wonder if part of this vote, and not to speak for Keith Law, because I haven't seen his explanation, but I wonder if Keith Law looks at it as, man, John Mozeliak and that front office and that ownership really put their manager in a tight spot this year, because how much did we talk about the bench just making absolutely no sense last season, right? You carry Brandon Crawford for as long as you do. It was so left heavy. There was no ability to mix and match for much of the season. And once the Cardinals kind of gave Oli some weapons to work with, he used them effectively. Luken Baker comes up and he comes through in some key spots. I felt like they kind of forced Oli to manage with a hand tied behind his back for much of last year. And so if you look at it through that lens and you think, hey, Cardinals had an 83-win season coming off a 71-win season, and maybe the front office held the manager back in some ways with the way that they constructed the roster, that's not all too dissimilar to a lot of the stuff that we said on b-schaeff Daily throughout the summer. So I'm not, like, it is surprising. I won't say that it's not, because I wasn't necessarily anticipating somebody throwing Oli a vote, but I also think it is a little bit more reflective of how the Cardinals view the job Oli Marmol did than how the fans view the job that Oli Marmol did this last season. And it wouldn't shock me for Oli Marmol to get quite a few Manager of the Year votes this coming year. Because in a world where everybody's the narrative is out there, the edict is known, the Cardinals are going to decrease payroll. They're not going to focus on winning. So what happens if they go out and win 85 games with a roster that on paper was lesser coming into the year? Well, the manager is going to get credit for that. So I would make the case, if I set the over-under right now, and this is not, I don't want to get into some territory, because what if they end up giving me a Manager of the Year vote, and then people would say, oh, Brendan's just going to vote for Oli just so that he can prove himself right from his podcast from November. Not like that. But if I said, will Oli Marmol get more votes next year for Manager of the Year than he did this year, I think there's a distinct possibility of that. I really do think that's possible when you look at what the Cardinals are setting up to be, and potentially what, if they have a successful season, who's going to be getting the credit for that. It's not going to be as much on the front office who said, yeah, let Arenado be traded if that comes to pass. Let Goldie walk. Let those starting pitchers walk. It's going to be a tight ship. It's going to be a lot more of a lean product in terms of the payroll. And if it goes well, which I'm not saying it's guaranteed to do so, but if it did, put yourself in that world where they go 85, 86 wins and maybe sneak into a wild card with that number, depending on what the rest of the NL does. Yeah, I think Oli Marmol would end up getting a lot of credit for that. So it is interesting that he got the vote. A lot of Cardinals fans wanted him fired. Cardinals aren't doing that. I think, again, I'm going to still be in the boat that they're right not to, especially considering the direction that they're going. But it is interesting. Oli might need a season like that in order to kind of secure his long-term future, depending on what we see, because it's not going to be John Mozeliak pulling the strings after this season. It's going to be Chaim Bloom. And so what's that working relationship going to look like between Oli and Chaim Bloom as that relationship begins to solidify? And it's not a lame duck season for Oli. He does have 2 years on that contract extension. Remember, that was signed before last year, and it counted for 25 and 6, not for 2024. He was already under a deal for that. So he does have that security, but obviously a new era is being ushered in, and I think it could line up really well with the way that Oli thinks and the way that Chaim Bloom is looking to install the new era of the organization. I think that could still be a lasting relationship, but it will be interesting to see how this next summer plays out for sure. But like I said, if you ask me, is he going to get more votes next year than he did this year with the 1? I might lean toward yes on that. I might lean toward that being a distinct possibility for Oli Marmol and the Cardinals, because I am picking up what they're putting down, at least at this point in the offseason. I am, as much as I think it's not totally fair to fans to say, be patient, and then pull the rug and say, sorry, we can't spend because you guys didn't support us enough, or we have too many questions about everything. Like, it kind of stinks for the fans that you're not going to be very enticed or excited about free agents this offseason, right? They're not going to make any big splashes and you're seeing some fan favorites and some big names go out the door. That's going to be part of this. But I also think in the long run, and maybe even in the short run too, the Cardinals could end up with a better foundation for the long term based on what they're doing this offseason. So I am a believer right now in what the front office is doing. I don't know how people might hear that and take that, but I'm going to let this play out, and I'm going to look at this through a very open-minded lens of, okay, if this is the plan that they're setting out, what does that look like, and are they executing the plan as they described? I'm going to be willing to let that play out. So let me know, Cardinals fans, where you're at on Oli Marmol right now, on the Manager of the Year vote that he received from Keith Law, and those prospects that they added to the 40-man roster, protecting them from the Rule 5 draft. Once again, remember, Underdog Fantasy, a way to support the show by signing up for Underdog Fantasy if you're interested in fantasy games. The link and the promo code b-schaeff is in the description to this video. But that's going to do it for this edition of the show. Thank you guys so much for sticking with the channel and for listening. We'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.